Hello, everyone. I'm Daz, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History. This podcast presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel or as a podcast from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit that subscribe button. And to keep up to date with everything American Civil War and UK history, you can do that via our website, where you will find blog posts, updates, links to all of our social media pages. The link is available in the podcast description. And today's discussion is about the Zulu Wars and the Battle of Isandlwana and Rorke's Drift. And joining me is historian Mark Wheatcroft of Mark's English History channel. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, Darren. Hello, everyone.
Mark, so let's get into it. Yes, there's a great little podcast I've been looking forward to recording for a long time. So, Mark, can you explain what Britain was doing in South Africa in 1879, please?
So, what you need to remember is that this is 1879. This period is at the heart of Victorian Britain and the height of the British Empire. So Britain had been in South Africa for a very long time by this point, probably a good 100 or so years. But there had been a number of challenges within Britain's presence in South Africa. So the main reason that they're there is because, looking at the map, the crown jewels of the British Empire was India. That was where nearly all of the money was coming out of at that period, in the early period of, shall we say, the second part of the British Empire. We'd lost America in 1781. They eventually get independence from Great Britain. And so then at that point, all the focus goes on to India. Now, we're looking at a time period before the Suez Canal is built. So the Red Sea route into the Mediterranean isn't an option. So it does mean that all the shipping has to come the long way round. And so South Africa, down at the bottom, becomes a key component of this. And the earliest settlement there is in what they call the Cape Colony, and that is at the city of Cape Town, and that being the large harbour port. But gradually, the British domination of South Africa starts to take hold. Britain isn't the only European country involved in this area in South Africa. We also have the Dutch Boers as well. So there is a friction between these two countries, between the Dutch and the British, and that leads on to something called the Great Trek. And the Great Trek is where the Boers leave the British-dominated colonies. So Britain has there's three white British colonies in South Africa. You've got the Cape Colony, which is, like I say, down in that area around Cape Town. You've got the Eastern Cape, which is just slightly above it. And you will get Natal Colony, and that is the area around on the Indian Ocean coast, around the area of today of the cities of Port Elizabeth and Durban, and then going north up to the Drakensberg Mountains. Now, what happens in about 1848, I believe it is something called the Great Trek, and that is where all the Dutch people, the Boers, which will become more famous later on into the early part of the 20th century, when South Africa becomes another major involvement with the British Army, leave the British-dominated colonies and move north. And so when they move north, they go up into the areas of the Orange Free State, which is around the area currently of the city of Bloemfontein, and into the Transvaal, and that's the area around Johannesburg. And so they become the 5 white colonies of of South Africa. However, there isn't just a South Africa white colonies in South Africa, you've also got the native populations as well. And so they're very tribal. And so the area around which the British have moved into around Natal, they come under the closer people. Um, they're generally quite peaceful and they've been pacified quite easily. Um, Nelson Mandela was closer, just as a side note. But to the border of the Natal province of Natal, the Buffalo River, to the west, to the east of that is the Zulu tribe, and the Zulus were far different to the closer, and that's what we're going to come into, and how Britain and the Zulus clash.
Okay, awesome. So, okay, you mentioned the Zulus there. So tell us how they rose to prominence in South Africa over that time, and then also explain a little bit about the Shaka Zulu warrior culture, if you would mind.
Yes, so the Zulus they really rise to prominence under their great king Shaka. I believe he's born in about 1830s, something like that. Um, but he builds upon, like you say, this warrior culture. So being a warrior in Zululand is a must. For example, you can't get married if you're not a warrior. It is deeply embedded within their culture. And so this small Shaka, because he wasn't born to be their king. He was born just as a clan leader. But this idea of becoming a warrior and this warrior culture comes out of that clan, and gradually he takes over and commands the entire Zulu people. And then he starts to threaten other other clans and tribes as well. So you have the Great Zulu Closer War, which the Zulus dominate, and they become the most feared and most active of the Southern African tribes. And again, this is what's going to bring them into sharp conflict with the attempts of British expansion in South Africa.
Mm. And now we know obviously who's involved in South Africa. Can you explain how the conflict between Britain and the Zulus will be inevitable?
Yes, so like I said, it's at the height of British imperial power. You've had there's a few things that ordinarily on their own do not make a conflict inevitable, but when you start combining them together, they begin to snowball. Now, one of the first things that is discovered is diamonds up in the northern part of colonial area. Its diamond deposit is actually found in a Dutch area, and the British, obviously being imperialists, they want control of it. And so something starts to develop, and it's a theory that comes from other imperialistic imperial possessions. So, for example, Canada goes through the same process, although be it in a much more peaceful way, and that's what's called confederation. So that's where these smaller colonies within the same larger geographical area are are merged to form one, I wouldn't say nation, but it becomes a bigger entity than it originally was. And so what happens is that you get this idea forming of bringing all the five white colonial areas under British control. Now, essentially, what this is a money grab of the diamonds under Dutch possession. But it will then ultimately lead to conflict with the Boers. Well, not with the Boers. It will do in the early 20th century, but with the Zulus at this time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to bring in a character now, or a guy now called Sir Henry Bartle Frere. So tell us a little bit about him and his influence on what's going to be going on here during this period?
Bartle Frere is one of these heavily influential people in British imperialist policy. He's brought into South Africa from India, so he has that experience of managing the transition from smaller independent colonies into a confederation of one larger colony. So it's already happened in India. It happens in Canada. So it's a policy that the British government is enacting around this period of time of confederation. It just means it's easier to control rather than having 5 or 6 colonies within a large geographical area. It's one. It's governed by in a capital by a governor. It's a lot easier to control. So he's brought in to implement this policy, and he's having a lot of kickback from it, especially from the 2 Dutch settlements, because they don't particularly want to be colonized within the British regime. It also has an impact because the border with the Zulus will become larger, and that he sees the Zulus as a significant threat, which to some extent they are, because they are a warrior-like people on the border with Britain, of the British territories. However, compare the comparable equipment available to those soldiers and to the British soldiers means that realistically they're not, they shouldn't be considered much of a threat at this point in time. However, like any imperialist person, he sees gaining more land, gaining more power, and more territory is in Britain's interest. And so he starts to push towards an invasion of Zululand. There's a number of conferences between the British and the Zulus. King Shaka by this point has died, and it's a descendant of his King Cetshwayo who is now the leader of the Zulus. And one of the things that Bartle Frere demands of the Zulus to prevent a war is for them to disband their impis, and the impis are the army. Now, for a warrior nation such as the Zulus, this is a nonsense demand. You know, they will not disband the army. And so this demand that's placed upon the Zulus by Sir Bartle Frere, he knows he's going to be rejected, and that is going to be the catalyst for the war to begin.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so talk us through the invasion of Zululand and what the objective was for the British Army.
So the invasion of Zululand, which begins in January 1879, is led by Lord Chelmsford, the general, and the objective is to move swiftly into Zululand and to advance upon their capital of Ulundi, capture Ulundi, and force the Zulus into surrender, and thusly the disbandment of the Zulu impis and what will eventually become the expansion of the Natal province. Now, the invasion is to be a 3-pronged invasion. 3 columns will invade the Zululand, one in the north, one in the south, and one in the middle. And it's the central column that Chelmsford himself will command. And this is where what we're going to talk about today all happens. So you generally find that the northern and the southern columns move in and move quite easily towards their targets. However, this middle column has a much different story to tell, and that column is commanded directly by Lord Chelmsford.
Mm-hmm. And again, I know you mentioned obviously the Zulu warriors, Zulu land. You know, Zulu people are warrior people, and and he was worried about them being aggressive. But to me, obviously, this move by Britain is very aggressive, isn't it? And again, I know you did explain it. So their aim is to basically land grab. They just want to take the land off the Zulus. Is that basically it?
Pretty much, yes. Yes.
And
It,
what? Yeah, but what would they have gained from it though? As far I mean, okay, yeah, it's land, but what was their hopes to gain from this?
so first of all, there is an element of an aggressive neighbour next door. But predominantly it's land and it's wealth. They're the things that they want. And so ultimately land a land grab is the primary objective of the British invasion of Zululand.
Okay, so basically, they would once they had grabbed the land, they would then obviously send settlers to go and settle on this land. Is that correct?
Settle on it, farm it,
Yeah.
exploit it for any natural resources that they may find within it. Um, very, very similar to the American Western expansion.
Hmm.
Um,
I get what
the
you're saying. Yeah.
the difference between the British colonial policy at this time and the Western expansion of America that's happening around the
Same
same
sort of
time.
time.
Like
Yeah, that's
you
right.
look,
Yeah.
it's 3 years on from Little Bighorn.
Hmm.
Is it 76 Little Bighorn? I think off the top of my head.
Something like that. Yeah.
So it's happening at that same time, and so
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes there is expansion that takes place because, like I say, in Kimberley, the gold, the diamond mines are discovered, and so there's a natural element of thereafter that. At this stage, I don't believe that there was much natural result known about the natural resources of this area,
Mm.
but as you would imagine, they would expect to find certain things within this area, and
Hmm.
so it's land grabbing. It is prime agricultural territory
Yeah.
as well. And so you can have settlers, you can have farmers, you can have, and there might be something there as well. But yeah, it's primarily it's to grab as much of this land as possible at
And
the
again,
time.
it had a so basically, not only are they grabbing the land, but they're also what they're thinking is we're eliminating this threat that's on our doorstep, and there won't be a threat anymore. Basically, so it's sort of
Yeah,
like it's got that two pronged sort of objective there. Yeah, I see.
yeah. It's kind of like, to be honest, the threat that the Zulus pose is minimal,
Yeah.
is absolutely minimal. There is a lot of parallels, shall we say, to the Sir Bartle Frere's assessment of the Zulu threat,
Hmm.
to George W. Bush and Tony Blair's assessment of Saddam Hussein's threat
I get you. Yeah.
in the early
Yeah.
in the early 2000s. In that, yes, they they might be a bit rogue, they might be a bit dangerous on the borders, but realistically, in comparison to the military power that you have to crush that threat,
Hmm.
it is very minimal.
Yeah.
And so that is it that they make the case for the threat to justify the military invasion, which the threat level isn't at the same level as they believe. And obviously, we're talking about a period of time where the passing of messages from Cape Town and Natal and Durban to Britain and back, to pass these messages back to the colonial office in London
Hmm.
about, takes months.
Hmm.
And so these people like Sir Bartle Frere, the governors of these regions, pretty much have a free hand to act as themselves as
Yeah.
policymakers of the British government.
I was going to bring that up about Parliament, because obviously they would have had to, you know, sort of in a way okayed it, but like you said, communication's not great at this point in time, and again, it's a long way away, isn't it, to get back to Britain, like you said,
Yes.
Betsy. So how aware were they of that? I mean, obviously they, again, like you said, this is the British Empire period, so any land grab is great for the British government, but how aware were they of this in Westminster, that this was going to be happening, this is going on?
So Parliament's basically at this time allowed rule by decree to the governors.
Hmm.
It was too far away for them to intervene. By the time that they get the messages that arrive in London about the build up and the threat of the Zulus, the invasion has already happened.
Yeah.
And so often it's retrospective action that's brought against these, I wouldn't say rogue governors, but these governors that act on impunity. So people like Sir Bartle will get recalled and will have to sit in Parliament and be questioned upon their actions.
Explain himself, yeah. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
um, in a similar way to like the Tory government that was in power during COVID, the
Yeah.
ministers there are now being asked in front of a
Public,
committee
yeah.
asking to explain their decision making, etc. It will be a similar nature there in terms of they are given devolved power, shall we say,
Hmm.
to be okay. You go off, you run this, but the day-to-day running of it is down to you because you can't just send an email to the Prime Minister saying, do you have I got your permission to invade Zululand? And
Yeah.
then 20 minutes later, you've got a reply, yes or no. Even quicker than that, probably in most cases. But you're talking months. And
Hmm.
in the meantime, the threat levels have changed, things like that. So what these people, these governors are given immense amount of power.
Yeah, so they're quite powerful people, aren't they?
That they,
Yeah.
they are very powerful. They are proxy dictators, if you will,
Mm, mm.
because they are able to act under their own impunity. Yes, they've got a little bit of oversight, but on the day-to-day running, day-to-day decisions, it's on them.
Well, again, like we've mentioned, obviously the aggression has come from Britain, but so let's how do the Zulus react to this invasion?
So obviously the Zulus, they've got a big army, but it's not massive, shall we say. And because of their equipment and their weaponry, they need they have to be canny with their decision
Hmm.
making. It's not like they can't go and say, okay, right, let's look at look at the terrain. Let's block a pass, stick some artillery in there, and when they come up, we'll just blast. We'll make them force their way through the pass under heavy defense. That's not how the Zulu army operates. The Zulu army is armed, and if you look behind me, I've got some Zulu artifacts
Yeah, so I've got a
behind me.
guy here, so you can explain their art, how they're armed and how they go about their
Yeah.
tactics and stuff if you want to.
So obviously they've got the large shield, and then they'll be armed with one of two weapons. So the gentleman in the picture there is armed with what in the English language we call an assegai, but in the Zulu language it's called the ikra. And it got that name because that is the sound the sound of the pop that it made as it was withdrawn from the body. So
Lovely.
it's a short range stabbing spear. The other weapon that they're often armed with is something called a nubkuri, which is a large stick with like a ball on the end of it, and that will be used for smashing in heads. And that's it. That is their sole armament. However, their greatest advantage of being armed in this manner is mobility. That
Hmm.
they're able to run, and the Zulus were extremely fit. They could run. They were trained to run 20 miles. And having run 20 miles, they then fought a battle. So it's
Wow.
not like you imagine running something just short of the London Marathon
Mm.
and then going into combat,
Wow,
you
so
know?
that is super fit, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So that that is their prime advantage, and that is going to be significant when it comes to one of the battles that we discuss.
Yeah. So obviously we've discussed the Zulus, what they're armed with, and so let's have a look at what they're up against, because they're up against an empire, they're up against different weaponry. So explain away the British soldier of the time of the 1870s.
So they are up against the most formidably equipped army that Britain has ever put into the field in terms of the weaponry. They are armed with the breech-loading Martini Henry rifle. So not only does it load from the breech, it's a single round, shall we say, the best way to describe it. I won't describe it just yet as a bullet, but it's a single round. So unlike the weapons that it replaced in terms of the Enfield rifle musket and going back further, the flintlock musket, it's a one slot in it goes job. Bolt drop action, so very similar action on it to a Winchester maybe, where you pull the trigger guard down and it drops the breech out, and then the round just slots back in. You pull it up and you fire it. Like any British weapon, it's also got the long bayonet around about 18 inches. Again, we're in a period that cavalry still reigns supreme on the battlefield, especially within a European theatre if there was to be a war in Europe. Obviously, we've recently had, only 9 years before 1870, had the Franco-Prussian War, which was the only real major war between two level European powers between the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 and the start of the First World War in 1814. So in Europe, it's relatively peaceful, but the British Army is still being equipped to fight a similar equipped army. This isn't just an army that the sole purpose is to defend an empire, which primarily reason for use at this period of time. But that's mainly just because of at that period of time within the later part of the 18th century that most of Europe is at peace. And so the British Army isn't being used in that context in the same way as it was in the early part of the century. The last time Britain had fought in a major European conflict was in 1858 in the Crimea. So, and they had back then they had the Enfield rifle musket. So this is one of the most modernly equipped weapons during at that period of time. You start to see a lot more ergonomic equipment coming in as well. So the equipment belts with the cross belt, everything being hung off the waist belt rather than the shoulder cross belts. And then this particular soldier is from the 24th Regiment of Foot, which is the regiment that plays the major part in both of these two battles we're going to talk about. And then they've got the Colonial Service pith helmet on with protection from the sun. A lot of modern equipment. So this, in theory, should have been a foregone conclusion.
Mm-hmm. But as we know in real life, that doesn't always happen, and we'll find out in a minute. But can I just ask? Obviously, we know, you get the saying from the Sharp TV program that every good soldier can fire 3 a minute, but that is obviously, as you know, loading from the muzzle.
Yes.
With your muskets, as you know yourself, being a reenactor, we go through all these drills. How many are you expected to fire a minute from a Martini Henry?
I would say probably between 9 and 12.
Yeah. Okay. So they're drilled and drilled and drilled, and a good British soldier could probably do that.
They could do. Yeah. So at the Battle of Mons in 1914, the British regular army, the BEF, were firing 19 rounds a minute on their bolt actions. So I'd say between 9 and 12 would be around about a good average.
And again, is that a similar weapon? So that's
No,
what I'm
that's
after, isn't it? Yeah.
that's the Lee Enfield bolt
Yeah.
action.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's just working out where
Yeah. Hmm.
exactly it would be. But I would say between somewhere between an average for a soldier would be between 9 and 12. A very, very good fast soldier will be pushing the 12. Probably a more average, lower skilled soldier will probably be around about the 9
Okay.
mark. In the same way it is when we're in the ranks
Mhm.
that you get some are capable of knocking out 3 rounds a minute with ramming and others are doing 2 without,
Yeah.
just because of that's the speed of the individual will cut. However, when these weapons are fired repeatedly, and this is something that will come up in the battle, it does have a issue.
Hmm.
But I'll come on to that when we get onto
Yeah.
the battles itself
And
and
we
what
are going to
happens.
move. We are going to move to the slopes of Isandlwana, and hopefully I'm
Yes.
pronouncing that right. I apologise if I mispronounce it at the beginning of the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Um, but yeah, so firstly, explain the location quickly for us before we get into the battle, and then get into the battle. And again, this is a famous painting, isn't it, of that battle?
Yeah,
I think it's in the Army Museum. This one, is that correct?
it is in the Army Museum, and I believe this is the one that's painted by Lady Buller,
Hmm.
who also paints the Scotland Forever, the Charge of the Scots Greys at Waterloo.
But yeah, so just give us an idea of the location and how these two armies are going to end up clashing at this point.
As I've already said, the Lord Chelmsford and the 24th Regiment of Foot and a large contingent of what is known as Natal Native contingent, which is um, African soldiers, have moved across the Buffalo River, which is the border between the then border between Zululand and the Natal province, at a place called Rorke's Drift. Now we'll come on to Rorke's Drift later on, but it's basically a for what Rorke's Drift, for what we need to know now, is a fold, and then they move up into onto the plateau around the rock known as Isandlwana, or which translates into Zulu as Little Hand. Now, a lot of and it's a few miles away. It's not that far. I have been to both of these locations, but I can't remember off the top of my head whether you could see it from Rorke's Drift or not.
Hmm.
Um, but you're looking about a day's march away. So at most 20 miles, but I don't think it's even as far as that. I would, like I say, I can't remember the exact distances involved. But it's a low sort of plateau in a sort of hilly area with rocky outcrops, as you could see. In fact, a lot of members of the 24th Regiment of Foot and other actually sort of mentioned how similar it looked to the Sphinx badges on their uniforms, with Egypt being that first battle honour that was bestowed to the British Army for their actions against Napoleon in Egypt. Any regiment that was there was given the Sphinx as an identification as part of that. So that's why you see the Sphinx on quite a few coats of arms of British armies. And so that's the position that they're in. The position of the Zulus is that they're moving towards Chelmsford's column, and they get both armies are in that vicinity in the morning of the 22nd of January 1879.
Hmm. So, do they know that they're in that vicinity? So, what's the intelligence for both armies at this point?
So the intelligence for the Zulus is very, very good.
Yeah,
Like I said before, their maneuverability is very good, but also this is their homelands
yeah,
as well. So when you're the occupying force within a foreign country, every inhabitant is a possible spy. And so the intelligence coming back to the Zulu command is very good, and it's very quick because of the speed that the Zulus can run.
Hmm.
For the British, there's a complacency, shall we say. And so their intelligence is not very good. And so what occurs is that a section of Zulus are spotted by the British force, and Lord Chelmsford takes away some of the cavalry under Durnford to go and chase them. But they're reconnaissance as well, but they're chasing. But what the Zulus are doing is they're drawing away the mounted element of the force away from the British camp at Isandlwana.
So it's a camp then, basically. That's what
It's
it is.
it's the camp, yes,
Mhm. Okay.
yes. But what the big British mistake again, it comes down to this complacency level that they just believe that they're going to destroy the Zulus.
Hmm.
They haven't made any fortifications, so they've not dug any trench works. They haven't lagered the wagons, which is a Dutch term to circle the wagons and to make a fortress. At the Battle of Blood River, when a Zulu force attacked a Dutch force, the Zulu force was annihilated with the loss of no Dutch casualties because that was the tactic that they used. They circled their wagons, prevented the Zulus from getting in, and then firing from within inside the wagons. The, the Dutch kept them at bay, and they didn't lose a single casualty. Now, at the British camp, uh, Lieutenant Colonel Pauline, who is now left in charge with Lord Chelmsford's departure, orders none of this to occur, and that is going to have a serious impact on the British Army or
Okay.
the British force.
Yeah. So again, they know they're out there, but they don't know they're going to attack them. So is it because the Zulus act? This is like a sucker punch, isn't it? This is quick. This is so.
Yes.
So talk us through what happens then, Mark, please, and how this
So
disaster is going to unfold for the British, as we know.
they have made the Zulus have made a tactical masterstroke in that this diversion force has drawn away the mounted element, and now they're going to attack. Now the Zulus attack in a formation that was known as the Horns of the Buffalo. So you had four divisions. I'll call it divisions because it's the European term. It's probably the easiest one to describe it as. So you had three at the front with one at the back in the center. Now, what happens is as it moves forward, the one at in the middle front will engage the center, the main army, and then the two divisions on the wings will stretch out. And as they stretch out, they come round and they encircle, and then that 12th division that was in behind will push forward into the center. And that was known as the Horns of the Buffalo attack method. And that's what is going to be used on the attack on the British force. And so when the Zulus show their hand and advance, the British army is completely caught by surprise. They had no idea that they were there and that they were coming. And so from that moment on, they're on the back foot. Now, at first, they're able to hold their ground. The commanding officers react fairly well to the situation that's unfolding, and they send out skirmish lines and they put down a heavy rate of fire, and it holds the Zulus off and it checks them for a while. However, things are going to become problematic for the British fairly quickly. Now I said about that the Martini Henry rifle had a flaw when putting down a lot of rounds of fire at once. And that is that the way that the rounds need to be ejected, when you're firing a lot of rounds all at once, a lot of rounds, the round begins to expand. And as a result, it keeps catching in the breech. And so the soldier would often have to use their bayonet to prise the round out. And so that starts to diminish the rate of fire. Alongside that, there becomes an issue with supply. So because the soldiers were caught on their heels, they've only got the amount of rounds that they were issued on a general day. They haven't been issued additional rounds for battle that would normally be. And so the ammunition is stored up in the baggage train. And so you're having to send men from, and these would often be drummer boys anyway, so it wouldn't necessarily detract from the firepower. But they will be having to run back to the baggage train to collect more ammunition. And this is where you get a real problem unfold for the British, in that the commissary up there at the baggage train is a bit of a stickler for duty. And so he will only issue rounds or ammunition to the right companies. He will only issue it if it has been signed by the commanding officer. And so he's not paying real much attention to the events unfolding, and he's more concerned about his ledgers being correct than actually what is occurring. And this will have a disastrous effect, because what the firepower that is at this moment in time holding the Zulus at bay begins to diminish. And as it diminishes, it means the Zulus can get closer and actually start getting into the British soldiers. And the battle itself at this stage takes a major turn. The horns of the buffalo technique is worked. The British are fully enclosed, and their firepower is running down, which means it is now hand-to-hand combat between bayonet and Icarus and knobkerries. And this is a technique. These are techniques that the Zulus are trained for. It's now a level playing field. The firepower element has completely disappeared. It will say completely disappeared, but it's been heavily negated by this absolute foul up in supply.
Yeah.
And so now these soldiers, the Zulus, are able to get in between. And so there's little groups of men fighting together against the Zulu hordes. The skirmish line has been pushed back, and the Zulus start to push the British army back into the camp and really start to encircle it.
And can I just bring up, so I know you mentioned how fit these Zulu warriors are. And again, the word is in there, warrior,
Yes.
Hand-to-hand combat is their trade. That's what they do.
Yes.
Like you said, with the stabbing weapon and the shield, and it's very similar to wars of the past, way back in history. How fit were the British soldiers, and what was their level of training when it came to this sort of combat? Because obviously we know they're well drilled and trained to fire a weapon, but when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, what sort of training did they receive there? And did they receive that sort of training?
So fitness levels, they were fit. They just weren't as fit as the Zulus. They would do route marches and things like that to build up fitness, but they are fit for the type of fighting that they are expected to be fit for. So they had a good level of fitness. They just had a good level of fitness for what they were expected to do. And that would be route marches, formation fighting, not not the fighting that the Zulu, not in the same fitness level that the Zulu would do, who is fit for their style of fighting. In terms of training, the British Army again would have significant amounts of bayonet training. However, again, this is training that's built up to fight against a European force that would be fighting almost the same as you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the type of training that they would have been given would have been defend against cavalry, defend against infantry, where that infantry is coming on in a dead straight line to line kind of fighting. What the Zulus are doing, the British Army really hasn't faced probably a deadlier force that fights. I wouldn't say haphazardly because that gives a disservice, but in comparison to European army forces, um, just trying to think of a good word because everyone I can think of sort of sounds a bit um, does them a disservice. Um, but because they fight unbroken or in sort of a broken formation, shall we say, it becomes a lot harder for the British Army to use its drills. So you see this in the early stages of the Jacobite rebellions when they're faced with the Highland charges. They would they were delivered in the very much the same way, where it's not a formation going in, it's just a body en masse.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a lot of development in terms of the drill to really get to grips with fighting an enemy that fights in this way. And so the drills that the British Army would have had in place at the day do kind of struggle against this kind of formation. And once the lines start to break and you get men, it's almost a man on man situation at that point. And so it does become a lot harder. And also you have to remember as well that from our own reenacting where when you've got a long armed musket or rifle with an 18-inch bayonet on, it's quite unwieldy.
Mm.
It's not the easiest weapon to handle. And so if you are a Zulu coming in against that and you've got this large shield and you've got this stabbing spear and a redcoat lunges at you with a bayonet, if you can get that shield in front of you to protect you and then to knock the bayonet away, that man's unarmed once you're inside that bayonet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it's easy.
Yeah.
And it's the same way that when the British developed the bayonet drill that they used against the Highlanders at Culloden, the Highlanders had the small shield. And so what the British were told to do was to stab the man to the right, not the man ahead, and rely on your next man to do the same, because it negated the shield and it meant that you were going into the bare flesh. Now, that was a drill that was built for a one-off battle.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next time the British Army went into combat after Culloden was in the 7 Years' War with Wolfe in Quebec, and he completely changed the drill again. Then you get the Napoleonic Wars with Wellington, and so that drill was gone from the drill manual by the point that the British are then in South Africa. And so the drills that they're developed struggle against this army, and then as a result you get this thing of once you're inside that bayonet point, if a Zulu beats your bayonet point, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
In that manner.
And so, as we know, this is the case here. And so, what are we talking about casualty? What? Because it's a complete rout, isn't it?
Casualty wise, the that British force is nigh on wiped out. You're looking
Hmm.
about 900 redcoats dead.
Hmm.
So co complete wipeout. You get a few manage to escape, run off down towards the rivers, um, two specifically in a moment that we'll come on to.
Yeah.
And then you've got what's left of Durnford's force that had moved away with Chelmsford that will come back and see what's happened.
Okay.
But
And
in terms of the force that was left at Isandlwana,
mhm.
it's nearly all it's all gone.
And am I right in saying there's something unusual that happens during the battle? So just quickly tell us about that.
Yeah, so halfway through the battle, you get a solar eclipse.
Wow.
So all goes black, and it's kind of like an omen in a way
Yeah.
of a portent of what's happened.
Okay. Okay. You mentioned there about a couple of soldiers that get away. But so this is an important part of the story of this battle, isn't it? And there's two guys that will save the colours. So tell us about those.
Yeah, so obviously the British Army, the prized possession for any regiment is the colours, and so often the case of whenever a unit is properly under pressure, the order is given to save the colours and to get them out of there. And so that is where you then get um, this last brave aspect of the battle, and that is where these two soldiers um, attempt to save the colours. So Lieutenant Cogwells and Melville are, are tasked to save the colours, and so they're both mounted, and they ride off in the direction towards Rorke's Drift and away for safety. Um, they are chased by the Zulus and eventually caught, and both are killed.
Oh wow.
As is often the case with the colours when it comes to imperial battles, that when they are found, the colours are still with them because often native regiments, whether that be in Africa, in Afghanistan, which is another disastrous imperialist campaigns for the British Army. The colours were attempted to be saved, and often those native cultures don't understand the importance of colours to the British Army. And so, where again, if you're thinking of fighting a European force, oh, we've captured the colours, that they'll ride around parading them like we've got them. Here, they're just left because actually the Zulus aren't interested in the colours at
No.
all, and so they are recovered by another force when the bodies of Cogwell and Melville were found.
Let's move on to Rorke's Drift then. And as you said, it is a ford, but it also is a aid station. Is that correct, or a supply depot? So just to explain a little bit about its location and what its purpose was.
Yes, so there's two Rorke's Drifts, if you get if you will. There's Rorke's Drift itself, which is the ford, and then there's the mission station, the old mission station of Rorke's Drift, known to the Zulus as Jim's Place, a mile or so down the track from the ford. Um, and so when the invasion begins, this is used as a by the British force for a number of reasons. So firstly, it's a supply depot. It's also allocated to be the hospital. And also there is a detachment of Royal Engineers who have been sent to Rorke's Drift, the ford, to build a bridge to enable even greater access into Zululand. So there's a lot going on around the Rorke's Drift area, but primarily speaking, it's a supply depot for that central column um, in the invasion of Zululand. However, as we already know, that central column has now been destroyed.
Hmm. And who is in command and defending this station? So we'll get on to the two commanders here. So we do have Lieutenant John Chard, and we have Bromhead. Sorry,
Bromhead,
yeah.
yes. So Lieutenant Bromhead has been left in command by his regiment, the 24th Regiment of the Foot, which goes on to become the South Wales Borders Regiment. So he's left there as commander of the supply depot itself, itself and the hospital, and the men of the detachment of the 24th Regiment of Foot that is left behind as guard, and the men who are currently sick in the hospital. And then you've got Lieutenant Chard, who is the Royal Engineers officer at that has been detached with the small engineering force to build the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
so at this stage, prior to knowledge of what's happened at Isandlwana and the realization that they may become a target, Chard is basically in command of one force, Bromhead in charge of another force, and they're working independently of each other at
Okay.
the early at the early at this point before.
Mhm. And so, what do they know that something's gone on further down the road at Isandlwana? Do
They
they know what's coming towards them? At what point do they
Yes,
realise, hang on a minute, we've got a problem here? And so, when they realise, so explain that, and then also explain the preparations that they will make to try and defend themselves.
they do obviously get word of it. Like I say, I can't remember the exact distances involved between them. So they may have even heard the gunfire going on, and then sort of but they certainly, a rider from the column does come back and let them know. So they are aware, shall we say, of an incident happening to the main column, and so they do start to prepare their the defense of the mission station. So they Bromhead stops all work on the bridge, and he comes back to the mission station, and he's the best person to have at the station at that time because he is an engineer. And so he looks around at the defense, at what they have, and decides how best to defend it. So they use mealie bags, which is corn, biscuit boxes, to build walls. There are elements of walls between different sections of the different buildings, but in general, it's a lot of it comes down to Bromhead as the engineer, really, really pushing it on. You've also got Colour Sergeant Bourne as well. He's heavily involved, and the commissary as well. But they throw out a defensive line. They create a defense in depth. So as you can see on that picture, you've got the outer perimeter that links the storehouse to the hospital, and then the hospital all the way around on the mealie bag wall to the corral. But then within that, you've then got the brisket wall box, creates a smaller compound, and then the redoubt inside that. So it's a real defense in depth that if one falls, you can fall back to another defensive position and then another one. So this is how a defensive position against the Zulus needs to look. This is what Lieutenant Colonel Pauline up at Isandlwana should have been trying to create at the camp, rather than just being left completely wide open.
So a lot of this would have already been obviously in place because, like you said, they've been here a little while, haven't they? So
Yeah, so
did they have to? They probably didn't have to do that much to try and beef it up a little bit, did they?
I don't know exactly how much was already there.
Mm.
Um, Obviously this position, it was a permanent position in terms of it was a mission station. There was significant buildings, so the hospital, the storehouse, for example, was already there, the corral area. So bits of it would have been there. So like the corral where they kept the cattle, that would have already been in situ. Um, but other sections of it would have needed to be beefed up fairly quickly.
How quickly after Isandlwana are the Zulus attacking Rorke's Drift?
Very, very quickly. Like you say, not long, not long at all. It all happens in the same day. I don't know exactly what the hours were between the end of one battle, beginning of the other. What occurs, what basically occurs is that Isandlwana happens so quickly that the veteran reserve um at Isandlwana doesn't actually see any action, and that's a that's a bit of a problem because this is the veteran reserve. These are the old guard. They want to fight. Um, it the warrior culture demands that they fight, and so they see then Rorke's Drift as an easy target. And it's
Mm.
okay, right? Let's go. We've beaten this. If we go and wipe that out, we've done our bit as well.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so
Yeah.
that's why they move. That's why they move
So,
against Rorke's Drift. So it's not
okay.
the entire army
Hmm.
that had fought at Isandlwana then
Okay.
goes right now. We're going to go on to there, and as often is portrayed, take Rorke's Drift and then invade Natal.
Hmm.
It's a small segment of unused men from the main Zulu army that fought at Isandlwana
Hmm.
moves independently against Rorke's Drift.
Okay. So again, as we know, they move against Rorke's Drift. So talk us through the action and what's going to happen at Rorke's Drift for the British Army and the Zulu warriors.
So the Zulus will attack. Um, again in their trusted horns of the buffalo formation. The difference is at Rorke's Drift is that the men are evenly spaced around the defense, and so they don't go towards the Zulus, and so the Zulus need to then be able to breach the walls of Rorke's Drift, and so the steady fire of the men from the walls, not just from the walls, but loopholes are being made in the hospital in the storehouse. So there's men all around the defensive perimeter. But also you've got a commissary there as well who is able to supply the men quickly with the ammunition. And so that issue about ammunition being withheld um, that you get at Isandlwana does fail. Now, there is one caveat to the differences between the armies, and that some of the Zulus are now armed with rifles.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. So do they know how to use the rifles as well when they actually acquire them? They obviously do, but is that because they watched the British using them, or did they already know how to use a rifle?
Certainly, the rifles have come from the battlefield at Isandlwana.
Yeah. So they didn't have a lot of time to get
No,
used to
like,
using this weapon.
however, it's probably the case as most things are. You quickly work out how to use it, or somebody knows how to use one.
Yeah.
You know, they've probably captured some people
Hmm.
and maybe got the one of them to show them. But yeah, there's certainly there's a knowledge of how to use a rifle, even if they've not handled one
Yeah.
extensively before and never actually. There is a knowledge of it. It may be as simple as the ones that know how to use it took them, and the ones that didn't.
Hmm.
But yeah, like considering the amount of spent rifles at Isandlwana, not all of them are in use
No.
at Rorke's Drift. So there is an element of there are some, and often they're attributed to being up in the hills that overlook or
Yeah.
in the film they're in the hills, the land's a bit flatter, but they'll be in sniping positions to try and shoot. So they're not actually going up. They're not trying to fight bayonet to bayonet with the British soldiers. They're further back firing.
Hmm. And so it's quite an intense battle as well, isn't it? Like you said, so it starts in the evening of the 22nd, and it goes on into the 23rd. But
Yes.
what's the outcome of this battle in the end? Well, we know that. But there might be some people that don't.
Yeah. So there's a number of attacks that go in against the British force. The hospital catches fire, which requires an evacuation. Um, but on the whole, the Zulus they do breach the outer perimeter, and so the British force, the 24th Regiment of Foot, the small company that's there, are forced to fight a final last action in in the smaller perimeter area. But the Zulus will eventually break off the attack because the mountain casualty rate that they're receiving. It's a similar situation to the Blood River battle. The British lose 17 soldiers.
Hmm.
I don't know exactly how many the Zulus lose, but it's a significant number. And so eventually the attack's broken off because they realised that the British defensive position is just too strong that they can't break it. That you would need significant munitions to break it, cannon, things like that to really do it. The equipment that the Zulus have just isn't enough to break a defended position.
Hmm. And one of the things that comes out of Rorke's Drift and down in history is due to the number of Victoria Crosses that are handed out. And so, if you could please explain a little bit more about that. And I think these are all the recipients. I can't remember how many there actually are.
I
Uh,
think it's 11.
yeah,
I think it's
but these are
11 off the
some
top
of
of
the
my head.
guys that received the VC. And yeah, so just explain that a little bit for us.
The Victoria Cross is the highest order of bravery issued to a serving member of the British Armed Forces. Comes into effect from during the Crimean War. In fact, all the medals are struck from bronze that has been cut from a cannon that was captured at the siege of Sebastopol. So even today, when they on the odd occasion that they are issued, it's still from that one gun. It's So 11 of them are handed out for various acts of courage and bravery. However, there has to be a slight note in that because the news of the two battles reached Britain all at once, there's probably an element of over celebrating Rorke's Drift to
Hmm.
cover up Isandlwana.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
not saying that these men that were awarded them weren't brave and didn't deserve them. There is possibly an element of that in that it's okay. Well, we'll do that to cover that.
Yeah.
So
Do you think there was an element of embarrassment, you know, from Isandlwana that,
yeah, definitely.
yeah.
It like I said, the timelines really work out well to make the comparison, but there is certainly that element of a professional force of an industrialized army
Yeah.
being wiped out by a native force that uses, in comparison, very
Mhm.
primitive
Yeah.
weapons.
Yeah.
In the same way with Custer's Seventh Cavalry
Hmm.
being annihilated at Little Bighorn, has a major negative and is an embarrassment for that
The
army
British
and that
Empire.
government.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
British Empire. I mean, look at it.
for
It's
that
supposed to be the
empire.
most powerful
And
empire ever.
what you need to do very, very quickly is put that to bed with something else.
And this plays
And
into that, doesn't it? Yeah.
Rorke's Drift plays right into that because
Hmm.
suddenly the attempted invasion of Natal by the Zulus had been repulsed by 124 men.
Yeah.
You know, it has Alamo links
Hmm.
in that sense of this brave few men that repulsed this entire invasion, which it was never an invasion. It was just a secondary assault against a logistics position.
Yeah.
That's all it was. However, there's something that now the government can wire up
Yeah.
support, um, and really get behind and sort of go, look, all these brave men, like we're going to give them, they've all been given Victoria Crosses. They've all, or not all of them, but there's 11 Victoria Crosses handed out. It's made like this massive, big element in terms of British military history.
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest battles or most famous battles in British military history. And yet it's a little footnote in comparison to
Yeah.
our history. Like,
Yeah.
how has it got such a, I wouldn't say cult following to some extent. Obviously, the film probably has a cult
Yeah. Which
following,
we'll go on to in a sec. Yeah.
but how has it ballooned into this, if you get what I mean?
Yeah.
From 124 men defeating, yes, significantly larger numbers of men in a raid against a supply depot, and yet it's remembered in the same breath as Agincourt of Waterloo and of the Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
It, so somewhere along the line, and the 11 Victoria Crosses is part of building that Rorke's Drift myth,
Yeah.
and part of that, especially in the early, very early, would say days after it, days and weeks, as news starts to filter back to Britain or through the South African colonies and then back to Britain, is that it changes from a raid on a supply depot to a repulsing of a Zulu invasion, and using the Rorke's Drift event to hide the shame of the Isandlwana event.
Hmm.
And that,
But
I
again,
believe, is
you're
how.
not taking anything away from these brave men, because I mean this was heroic, wasn't it, at the end of the day? But I
Yeah,
get what you're saying. Yeah, I
yeah, like
completely
that.
understand it.
These men were fighting for their lives, and
Yeah.
they pulled off a miracle in that sense.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in terms of how it's remembered,
Especially in that time period, I completely get what you're saying, and I'm actually looking at it slightly differently than I was before. I think
yeah,
because I've never really thought about it like that in that way before. Yeah, so you've really got my brain going there. But yeah,
yeah.
I
So, like I say,
think
it's to
that
take
there's a
nothing
real
away from the
valid point.
bravery of what these men did
Yeah.
that day/night. It's just reevaluating the aftermath
Yeah.
of it, of the event, and how that has changed the perception
Hmm.
of how we view this event and actually what this event originally was.
Yeah, of course. Excellent. That's really good. So what next for the Zulus, though? I mean, after all this, what happens to the Zulus, going forward?
So unfortunately for the Zulus, their their victory at Isandlwana is also their death knell at the same time,
Yeah.
because now the full weight of the British Empire is going to fall on them.
Hmm.
What was originally a clash on the borders and was being dealt with by the troops that were there
Hmm.
is now going to snowball and balloon up in their faces quite big, quite quickly. And so the war takes a dramatic turn for the Zulus, and they very, very quickly lose, shall we say. The worst thing that they could have done was inflict the casualties that they did at Isandlwana,
Yeah.
because they've now the whole weight of the whole weight of Britain's military pressure is applied upon them. They
Yeah.
do get one more. I'll say one more. There's one more significant casualty the Zulus do inflict, which is um, the Imperial Prince of France, so one of Napoleon's grandchildren, I think it is. He's killed whilst fighting for the British
Hmm.
in Zululand, and that wipes out the Bonaparte line and the descendants of Napoleon at that point. But yet, very, very quickly, there's two or three big battles, and then Alundi falls, and the um, the Zulus are subjected.
Hmm.
By that stage, Caswell is taken prisoner and is brought to Britain, where I wouldn't say it's paraded, but he's seen as a sort of the next time you see him when he's in Britain, he's in a suit and things like that. So he's sort of that kind of very imperialistic westernization of a native leader
Yeah.
becomes apparent. So yeah, very unfortunately for the Zulus, by winning their great victory also means that it's that old saying of you've won the battle but you've lost the war.
Yeah.
And that was precisely it. If they'd have had a minor defeat by the British Army, by the British forces earlier in the war, come to terms, there might have been a more enviable peace, shall we say?
Hmm.
But because of that victory, they then had to be destroyed.
Yeah.
You couldn't leave them. They go, oh no, like that's it. They need to be defeated significantly now.
Yeah. And so, but there are still Zulu communities in South Africa now. Is that right?
Yeah, so the Zulu tribes and the Zulus themselves, they do continue. So they're not there's no extermination of Zulus, shall we say? They're just subjected to British rule. A number of South African presidents have been Zulu.
Hmm.
I think it's Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma, I think it is. He was Zulu. And so yeah, so Zulus are that they are still they the Zulu communities does still exist, and they're very proud of their heritage.
Yeah, of course they are. Yeah.
They do a regular reenactment of Isandlwana,
Hmm.
albeit they wear Crocs, which is looks quite funny at times.
Hmm.
Health and safety, you know.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But yeah, like so, yeah, that it's a very proud heritage that they do hold, and considering the term, the atrocities that they go through
Yeah.
from Rorke's Drift up until sort of even like as late as 1999. So you have Rorke's Drift, then you have the British colonisation or confederation, the expansion of South Africa. Then in 1945, you get the rise of the Boer National Party and apartheid all the way through until the mid 90s. And then even after,
Mhm.
when you go to the power sharing, you have almost a civil war between the various different South African tribal groups, like the Zulus, the Xhosa, um, are all vying for power within the new democratized South Africa. So they have had a very traumatic history post Isandlwana.
Mhm.
And so maybe that's probably why there's that link back to when they were a great power.
Yeah.
He's so fondly remembered by them,
Mm.
by the Zulus.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to something that a lot of people will resonate with, and that is the immortalisation of, Rorke's Drift with the film Zulu, which
Yes.
I would imagine most military buffs would have seen. Now, I know there are a couple of movies, aren't there? I think there is a movie about Ismaila as well, isn't there?
Yeah, Zulu Dawn.
Yeah, Zulu.
Um,
Yeah, I've never actually watched that. Sorry
no,
about
it
that.
I've only watched it a few times. It's not
Yeah.
it's not the same
No.
as Zulu. It does have Phil Daniels is in it as a
Hmm.
young soldier, and
Yeah.
I don't know the actor's name, but he plays Harry Grant in Porridge.
Hmm.
He's in it, and he's the commissar who refuses to give the supplies over. Um, but yeah, it obviously the Michael Caine Zulu is sort of the most famous
And
of.
am I right in saying there's a Shaka Zulu film as well, or something?
I believe that was sort of a
Yeah,
mini TV
yeah,
series.
something like that. I remember my
But
friend talking about that once. Yeah,
yeah,
he's
but
lost,
again,
but yeah,
that's Shaka's rise to power
yeah.
and
Okay.
the Zulu's rise to prominence. So it's a little bit it's quite a long way before what we've been talking about
Yeah,
today.
but from what I understand, this is 18. Sorry, 1964. I believe this comes out.
1960s, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, when I watch it, I mean, it's timeless. I mean, um, it's hard to believe that it was a 1960s film when I watch it even now. It's so tired. It's such a great movie, isn't it? I mean, it's fantastic.
It is like you say, there's a few discrepancies within it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think that they're put in to make the film to give the film a bit of life
Hmm.
in that period up until the attack begins,
Yeah, of
and to put
course.
so
But
so
that's Hollywood, though, isn't it? Hollywood does that with most
yeah,
you
yeah,
know
we
movies. You're going
like
to get that.
any film, a film's made for entertainment,
Yeah, of course it is.
and
Yeah.
you have to take away the element of you have to take the odd inaccuracies within a Hollywood film and look over them. That as historians, I think we get ourselves hooked on the inaccuracies a little bit too much
Yeah,
rather than
yeah,
watching a film from an entertainment point of view.
I agree. Yeah, and
But yeah,
one of the biggest inaccuracies is Private Hook, isn't it? In
yes.
the movie, so he's portrayed completely different to what the actual person was. So just explain a little bit about the difference there.
So yeah, so in the film, Hook's in the hospital
Hmm.
and is often the colour sergeant and the sergeant who's in the hospital call him a malingerer and that he's got nothing wrong with him. Uh, but at the end of the battle, the sergeant who's in the hospital in delirium, he's in it's him and Hook alone in the room when the Zulus when the hospital's on fire, the roof collapsing in, the Zulus are broken in, and it's Hook that pulls him to the rescue. In real life, Hook was a model soldier. I'm not 100% sure if he was just stationed at the supply depot or whether or not he was in hospital. But if he was in hospital, it was for legitimate reasons. It wasn't because he was malingering with a boy on his back, as made out in the film. And to such an extent was the different portrayal in the film to in real life that his family refused to attend the premiere
Really? Oh wow.
because of the way in which he had been betrayed in that manner.
Yeah. I suppose
Um,
that would have been quite upsetting, actually, wouldn't it? If yeah,
yeah, because he's one of the VCs as well.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
It so I don't know why they necessarily picked on Hook to be that individual, but yeah, that's the biggest discrepancy
Hmm.
of the film. There's a few others. So, for example, the location that the film's set in is it's set up in the Drakensbergs in the
Hmm.
mountains. That's purely done from an artistic point of view
Yeah,
to give it to give it a lovely backdrop rather
yeah, of
than
course,
actually just flat plain land. That's purely done for that. Also, they make the ford and the bridge a lot closer. But again, that's that artistic license because if you've got it on top of each other from a cinematic point of view, it works. If you're suddenly trying to purvey a mile away, you lose a bit of the cinematic. So again, that's one of those things that you kind of just have to take with a pinch of salt and say they've done it for purely from a cinematic reason. likewise, putting that backdrop, putting it up in the Drakensbergs, you've got these big towering mountains over the top that look stunning, rather than it just being a whole heap of blue sky.
Yeah, but again, such a fantastic movie. I love it so much. I mean, I haven't watched
Yeah,
it for about a year. I think last time I watched it was about 12 months ago. But
yeah.
I know it was on over Christmas in the UK, and a lot of I'm in a lot of history groups, and there was a lot of chatter about it. So and WhatsApp and this, that, and the other. So yeah,
Uh,
excitement
uh,
from a certain and not just from younger people, but from people from that era because they remember it. Then when it came out.
yeah. I think there's a couple of things that you need to add, and this goes to with a lot of films really about historical things. So, yeah, over Christmas, there was a lot. The Dan Bus was on, Longest Day, like you name it. Go through the Second World War was on. The way I see films like this, and I've changed my view on it a little bit. I've actually mellowed from the historian's point of view.
Hmm.
This gives people access to history.
Exactly. Yeah.
It might not be correct,
Hmm.
okay, but something like Zulu, it gives access to the history for people who maybe wouldn't necessarily pick up a history book, but they'll watch a film and they go, that was interesting.
Hmm.
I want to find out a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's like a gateway drug, isn't it? It's like Gettysburg, the movie was for me. This
Yeah,
probably would have been.
sharp,
I would
sharp for,
imagine this film probably got a lot of people into history, through
yeah,
the years.
like you said on many occasions, the Gettysburg film got you into the American Civil War. For me, getting into Napoleonics was all about sharp,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Same thing as the gateway
not
drug. Yeah,
not necessarily. Okay, Gettysburg is like probably is more historically correct than sharp is,
yeah.
but it gives you that it's that hook that
Mm.
gets you into something that you then go and pick up a book or back in the day go and buy a documentary video or hit YouTube and find a podcast on it these days or something like that. It's just that it gives you that accessibility.
But moving on, mate. Any book recommendations on this period of history that you yourself have read and that you would recommend to other people to read?
Yeah, I've got a few here. So first one I use quite a lot in this series is which is the Battle Story series. Um, fairly small book, fairly easy going. So if you're really like if you've watched Zulu over Christmas, you thought you want to learn a bit more about it, you've watched this podcast, you want a bit more info, this is your one. Like I say, for anyone who knows a, a fair bit about the battle, I'd probably say not the best book, a bit light for you, but as an introductory book, very, very good. And then you got two big hitting books. So both of them by the historian Saul Davids, who's actually got this one, Zulu, which tells us all the story about the Zulu War. And you can see from the size of it just how into detail he goes
Yeah.
in comparison to the other one. And then this one as well. So it's Victoria's Wars by Saul David as well. Doesn't really have any, because he wrote the Zulu as well. He doesn't actually cover that much on the Zulu Wars, but if you want to get an insight into the grander scheme of the imperial wars of Victorian Britain, that's a very good shout. It goes into, for example, there's a lot on Afghanistan and um, Egypt and the Sudan. So if you're interested, if you like your dad's army and want to follow Jonesy's stories all over the place, that's your one. So
Hmm.
for that period, they're the three. You also you've got your obvious choices as well. You've got your Osprey series. They do Isandlwana Rorke's Drift. Again, if you are just touching the period, they're a great starting point as well because they give you plenty of pictures, plenty of maps. You can really understand it. A little bit light on historiography, but you know what? That comes a lot comes down to the reader. You
Yeah.
know, and I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, you must read this one because it's 500 pages long and it is covered all X, Y, and Z sources, stuff like that. If you're just starting out your historical journey, or if you're sort of looking into a period for the first time, sometimes you need that nice light one just to get you going. So I'd always recommend Osprey up there as well, within my book selections. book
Okay, cool.
recommendations. Also, there is a battle series on DVD. I had them all on VHS. Then I've got some converted from D to DVD. I can't remember the name. Battle Through History or something like that. Conflicts in
Mhm.
Time series. They're quite old now. Quite when you watch them, you're sort of like, my God, this looks the the production looks really bad on these. But they're quite good as well if you can lay your hands on them. I know there is a Zulu Wars one available.
Yeah. And I just want to bring up one thing before we move on to completely different subject. If you ever want to visit Chard's grave, that is very accessible, and location of that is Hatch Beecham in Somerset, Church of St John the Baptist. I stopped there. Well, you had to come off the A303 a little bit, but I was on my way down to Great Torrent in 2022, and my friend said to me, "Well, I can take you there. I know how to get there." And we did. We stopped there, and that is my picture. Did a little video for American Civil War and UK history as well, Facebook page at the time. But yeah, so that's the location of that. So that's worth a little visit. Obviously, a BC recipient as well. Okay, Mark, let's have an update on Mark's English History channel. What you got lined up for the coming year? Because Mark does have his own YouTube channel and that. So do you have your own podcast as well, don't you?
Yeah, so I've got the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I, I put some stuff out on the podcasting side of things, the Buzzsprout stuff, but I tend to stay away from it because a lot of the things that I tend to do are on the ground visits
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
videos. So sort of if you just do it as an audio file, you can't.
No.
I'm describing what I'm seeing, if you get
Yeah.
what I mean. And so I tend less to do sort of sit down. I don't do sit down chats like what you do, Daz. So when I do sort of more presentation-y sort of PowerPoint talks, stuff like that, then I pop them on there. But for a lot of my stuff, I don't. So coming up, I've got a new series about to come out. I've done a bit of processing on some of them, which was from footage I shot back in October when I visited the Somme.
Hmm.
I've put out a couple so far, which were an extension of the Walkabout series, which was when my visits to Agincourt and Cressy. I put them out first because they're more standalone, it's easier to deal with. But I have got my Walk in the Somme series coming out. I don't know when I'm going to drop them. To be honest, that's something I need to get myself more organised on doing videos, I must admit. Um, but yeah, they'll be coming out. I think I've got about 4 or 5 maybe of those to come out.
Yeah.
Um, Other than that, this year I haven't really got much in the pipeline at the minute. I'm still trying to figure out what visits, what events I'll be looking at to do. I've got some shot from a couple of years ago, which was the Normandy 44 series. I'll probably re-drop them, repost them out around the anniversary because it's 80th anniversary of D-Day this year.
Hmm.
So they'll probably come out again just as we move through that period. Other than that, no, not too much. Obviously, I've started writing my corner of a foreign field
Yeah.
articles
So I was going to get onto that. So
on your website.
there, Mark has got space on the American Civil War and UK History's website, which does include Mark's English History channel. So you can go directly to some of Mark's stuff through that avenue if you don't go through it on his YouTube channel straight from YouTube. You can find links there, so there is space for that. But Mark has started this new blog, weekly blog post. So just again, sorry for cutting you off there, but just explain a little bit behind that, please, mate.
Yeah, so it's a corner of a foreign field. So a lot of the stuff that gets posted on Daddy's site, obviously it is American Civil War and UK history, but it is predominantly more American Civil War or American history than British, really. So I wanted to just tie up with some stuff that's regular posted from the American point of view to look at the British point of view. And a lot of the stuff when we do post, it's these big famous events. So we've obviously done Rorke's Drift today. I know in the pipeline we discussed about doing the Waterloo episode later this year, and possibly a Battle of the Somme one. Although I know that's all that's always a tricky one because of the date. For the first day of the Somme falls on the same day as the first day of Gettysburg. So I know it's
Yeah.
always a bit of a clash for space on that one. Um, but also I wanted to look at a number of different things. This last year I've really got back into looking at Great War history. And one of the things that I sort of come to realize is these battles that we know from the Great War, the Somme, Ypres, places like that, they're huge battles. So let's try and tell some more stories. Let's try and find out a bit more about the unit sized battles that take place with it. Like you look at the Battle of Somme, you're looking at a 20-mile front, and yet we try to tell that story in one go for the most part. So actually, let's drill down. Let's find. Let's write. Let's look at articles and write a piece about the Ulster Division on the Tietval Heights. One of the few units to actually take their objective for the Schwaben Redoubt. Let's look at um, various different sectors around the Ypres salient. Like the Ypres salient stays pretty much in situ for 4 years, and yet it's like a rolling tide coming in and out. Gradually, Germans pushing closer to Ypres, British Army pushing them back again. And so, rather than just looking at it as a one single battle, let's look into these more detailed segments, and that's where I wanted to go with it. And I can obviously move around as much as I want. So one week I'll be looking at the British in North America, for example, in the French Indian Wars, and then the next week I can go to the parachute regiment in the Falkland Islands.
Mm-hmm.
So it's such a wide aspect that can be used. But yeah, and I also think that sort of something like a regular weekly article, it can be a couple of hundred words. My biggest problem with what I'm doing at the moment, especially the videos, it just takes up so much time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And it's kind of that's why it goes months upon months between releases coming out. And so I look at it and think, okay, how can I increase engagement? And the way I did that before was on the Instagram page doing the on this days, but that's so time consuming, it's ridiculous to keep putting out a post every day. Like it's great to put out a post every day, but it does take a lot out of you. And in the end, to be honest, all you was getting was the same few likes anyway. So there's actually the engagement on it can be pretty low. So it's just a way of sort of moving the channel to something a bit where more what I would like it to be if I in my dream world.
Yeah.
I am an academic historian.
You are, yeah.
By trade. So it doing just little posts here and there, it kind of does it does feel a bit amateurish at times. And so being able to then move on to the website and to actually write articles and blog posts and things like that, it just ups that ante a little bit. And so it's still to coincide with the history channel, with the videos. It's just that, like I say, where finding time to do them is a struggle. It just gives me the opportunity to write regularly or post regular content, with it being a lot easier because I can just come home, boom, 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 half an hour to an hour's worth of writing done.
So yeah, you can read Mark's blog post on the website. A link will be in the description, and like I said, links to Mark's English history channel. But again, you will find that inside the website as well. But all that's left to say is thank you very much again, Mark. I appreciate you giving up your time to come and talk about the Zulu Wars, and we'll
Yeah,
see
no
you again
problem.
soon.
Yeah,
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
see you soon. Bye bye.